They were just a regular family on a summer road trip. But somewhere between a motel in Truth or Consequences and the open desert, they vanished. No bodies, no wreckage, no answers. And for 25 years, their daughter kept searching. Until a single piece of a car seat buried in the sand finally whispered the truth. This story isn't about closure. It's about what happens when someone refuses to forget. Stay with me. The wind had a strange way of remembering things in Truth or Consequences. It didn't howl. It didn't whisper. It scraped. Across cracked asphalt, rusted fences, forgotten motels. It carried the dryness of time, the silence of old tragedies, and the dust of places people no longer talked about. And on that particular August morning, it carried something else. 25 years had passed since the Everly family vanished on their road trip to the Grand Canyon. No trace, no vehicle, no goodbye. Just a sudden absence. The father, Nathan, the mother, Susan, and the youngest child, Danny, age 6, all disappeared somewhere between a motel checkout in Truth or Consequences and a gas station that never confirmed if they arrived. The fourth seat in the minivan, meant for Rachel, the eldest daughter, had been left empty. She had stayed behind that week with her grandmother due to a lingering cold, a twist of fate that would haunt her every day for the rest of her life. And now, after all these years, something had resurfaced. It was early morning when the call came in. A research team from the University of New Mexico, doing seismic studies near the Gila National Forest, had stumbled on a metal object partially buried beneath a dune formation. It wasn't the object that startled them. It was the smell, faint, dry, chemical. The heat had bleached the seat's once dark fabric to a faded blue-gray. A single buckle remained attached, burnt plastic. Deep cracks across the headrest, as if something had been dragged over it. There was no blood. But carved into the metal frame, in childish, uneven scratches, were the letters D.E. In the sheriff's office, Deputy Marlene Ruiz tapped her pencil nervously against the desk as she read the report for the third time. She had been 10 when the Everlys disappeared. It was the first real tragedy that ever reached her ears in this sleepy town. The kind that stained childhoods in ways you only understood as an adult. And now it was back. "You're not going to believe this," she said aloud to no one, staring at the photo the researchers had sent. "This damn seat, it's real." The sheriff, a grizzled, tired man named Clay Dobbins, who had replaced the last one after a quiet scandal no one dared talk about, stood behind her silently, arms folded. "They need to send it in," he said. "Chain of custody, proper forensics. We don't make assumptions." But the scratch on the seat frame was unmistakable. D.E. Danny Everly. 30 minutes later, across the state, a phone buzzed on a cluttered nightstand. Rachel Everly, now 36, sat up slowly in bed, staring at the caller ID. She hadn't seen the area code 575 in over a decade. She answered with a whisper. "Hello?" A pause, then, "Miss Everly? This is Deputy Ruiz from Sierra County Sheriff's Department. I believe we found something." "Doc?" Truth or Consequences was the kind of town people passed through, not toward. A resting place between Albuquerque and El Paso. Known mostly for its name, a relic of a game show stunt from the 1950s, and the hot springs that tourists stopped for but rarely stayed overnight. It wasn't built for long visits. It wasn't built for long memories either. Rachel hadn't returned since she was 11. But now, the moment her boots touched the cracked sidewalk outside the station, it felt like stepping into a photo album where someone had torn out all the smiles. The air was thick with a dry heat that clung to your throat. Sunlight bounced off the windshields of 2 old patrol cars that hadn't been washed in weeks. And across the street, a diner blinked its neon open sign, even though it had clearly been closed since 2009. She held a folder in her hand. The original police reports, her father's bank statements, a photo of her mother holding Danny at a picnic 2 weeks before the trip. Rachel knew what people thought when they saw her digging into the case again. She's the one who stayed behind. She just wants closure. She needs to move on. But grief doesn't sit still. It sharpens. It whispers. It waits. Deputy Ruiz met her at the front desk with an awkward, almost apologetic smile. "I'm sorry you had to come back here for this," she said, "but I thought you'd want to see it yourself." The seat was in an evidence room sealed behind double locks, covered in a plastic sheet, resting on a cold metal table like a body waiting for autopsy. Rachel stared at it for a long time before speaking. "That's the middle row. Passenger side. You remember it?" Rachel nodded. "My brother sat there. Always kicked his feet up and smeared his crayons on the window." She reached forward and gently peeled back a corner of the plastic, the crack in the headrest, the frayed seatbelt, the indentation where Danny had once spilled juice, and her mother tried scrubbing it out with lemon-scented wipes. And there it was. D.E. Not just scratched, carved, with the kind of pressure only a child would use when they wanted something to last forever. Rachel turned to Ruiz. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Where exactly did you find it?" They drove 2 hours east into the desert. The landscape changed gradually, from sparsely built roads and gas stations with peeling signs to pure, flat nothingness, just sand, sky, and the occasional dry bush curling in the wind. Finally, Ruiz pulled off the road onto a dirt path marked only by a rusted sign. "Private property. No trespassing." "This land used to belong to an oil company," she said, "but they stopped drilling out here in the early 90s. Just a lot of empty land now. People dump stuff out here all the time." The researchers had flagged the location. There was a tarp partially buried, a shovel nearby, and just beyond it, a patch of sand flattened unnaturally like something had been dragged or dug up. But no tracks, no fresh signs of human activity. Rachel kneeled beside the spot and ran her fingers through the sand. It was still warm. "Someone came back," she murmured. "Someone uncovered this on purpose." Ruiz hesitated. "There's one more thing." She opened the trunk of her cruiser and lifted a plastic evidence bag. Inside, covered in dust and age, was a tiny object, a silver charm in the shape of a crescent moon, strung on a cracked leather cord. Rachel gasped. She knew it immediately. That was Danny's necklace. Inside her motel room that night, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the charm. A single fly buzzed against the window. The air conditioner clicked and rattled in the wall, spitting out stale, lukewarm air. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. Her, Danny, and their parents, taken just days before they left. Standing beside the family's dark green Plymouth Voyager, in front of a diner just off Main Street. In the photo, Danny had the necklace around his neck, and now 25 years later, it had appeared beside a buried seat. With no body, no car, no bones, just questions. Rachel traced the shape of the crescent moon with her thumb. "I'm going to find you," she whispered. "Whatever it takes." But what she didn't know was that someone else had been watching her that day. From the ridge above the desert site, hidden behind a jagged outcrop of rocks, a man in a faded hat held binoculars to his face. He hadn't been this close to the Everly case in over 2 decades, and he couldn't let the truth come out. Not now. Not after what they buried. Rachel Everly never slept through the night. Not since she was 11. She had tried everything: white noise machines, herbal teas, guided meditations, even therapy sessions where strangers told her that closure was something she could find within. But every night around 3:17 a.m., she would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, as if someone had screamed her name from the other side of a locked door. There were no voices, just the recurring dream. She was in the back seat of a van, alone. The world outside the window wasn't moving. And from the front seats, where her parents should have been, came only silence. Rachel lived alone in a small second-floor apartment in Santa Fe, cluttered with old newspaper clippings, boxes labeled Everly, 1999, and a corkboard filled with string and pins and faded Polaroids. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a crime scene, frozen in time. The rent was cheap, the landlord forgetful, and that was exactly how she lived. Her refrigerator held more photographs than groceries. On the door, Danny's school drawings. A printout of the last known CCTV image of the family, waving goodbye from the motel lobby in Truth or Consequences. A sticky note that simply read, "They didn't just vanish." Her world had shrunk into an orbit of questions no one wanted to answer. She hadn't always been this way. There was a time when Rachel Everly was filled with light, a curious child who loved thunderstorms and National Geographic documentaries. She wanted to be a paleontologist when she was 6. Her mother used to laugh and say, "You dig into the past more than any grown-up I know." Danny was her shadow back then. He was born premature, 2 months early, barely breathing, but by the time he turned 6, he was all energy and wonder. He called her Rah-Rah. He used to sit beside her with crayons while she read her dinosaur books and say, "Tell me another story about the T-Rex that got away." And she always did. Even now, she still heard him sometime. After the disappearance, everything changed. Rachel remembered the drive back from her grandmother's house, her aunt's voice trembling, her eyes scanning the horizon for a van that wasn't there. The next few weeks blurred together. Police reports, press conferences, flyers stapled to telephone poles, a closed casket funeral held with no bodies, just empty boxes, because people needed something to bury. And then, silence. The town moved on, but Rachel couldn't. She grew up in a blur of foster homes and pitying glances. Her grandmother passed a year after the disappearance. Her aunt tried, but grief made people brittle. At 17, Rachel ran away and never looked back. She worked in diners, cleaned motels, earned her GED, then a scholarship. Eventually, she clawed her way into the world of journalism, not because she wanted fame or headlines, but because she had one story to finish, her own. Rachel never told her editors why she only pitched stories about cold cases, why she obsessed over missing persons, old gas stations, and miles of forgotten highway. They called her the Ghost Finder, a nickname she hated. She was never looking for ghosts. She was looking for a door back into the past. One she could walk through and scream, "Wait, don't go." She had one surviving item from her family that no one else knew about, a VHS tape, labeled in her mother's handwriting. Everly Road Trip 1999, Danny's 6th birthday. She kept it hidden in a wooden box beneath her bed. She couldn't bring herself to digitize it, couldn't bring herself to watch it more than once. But the audio was burned into her brain, the laughter, the wind through the open window. The song her mom hummed as they crossed into Arizona. The last voice on the tape was Danny's. "Are we there yet, Daddy?" Then static. Now, back in Truth or Consequences, walking past the old El Rancho motel, Rachel felt like she was slipping between worlds. She paused outside room 6, the last place her family was confirmed to have stayed. The motel had long been shut down, its walls cracked with vines, windows boarded, and the sign half fallen. But the door was still there. Room 6. The same door from the photo taken on the morning they left. She could still see her father's arm around her mother. Danny's sneakers untied. Herself half smiling, trying to look older than 11. Rachel pressed her hand against the wood, still warm from the sun, still holding something. That night, Rachel met Deputy Ruiz for coffee. They sat in silence for a while, each holding their mugs like shields. "You don't look like someone who gives up," Ruiz finally said. "I can't," Rachel replied, "because if I do, they just become a story, one of those stories people tell each other like a ghost tale. And my brother was real. My mom had calluses on her hands from guitar strings. My dad hated olives, but always picked them off for us. They were real. Ruiz nodded, but her eyes were sad. Some people here, they don't want this stirred up again. Rachel met her gaze, steady. Then they're afraid of what we'll find. Later, alone in the motel, Rachel opened her laptop. She scrolled past messages from her editor, flagged voicemails, rent reminders, and opened a folder called Everly 1999, Field Notes. There were subfolders for motel logs, old witness statements, possible sightings, Red Bluff, Wells rumors. But one folder remained empty. It was labeled Answers. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. She thought about her father's silence on the trip, the way her mother had been crying in the bathroom 2 nights before they left, the strange phone call she once overheard, her dad saying something about having no choice. She had always buried that memory. But now with the seat uncovered and Danny's necklace beside it, the past was clawing its way back up, not a memory, not a ghost. Something real, something buried. She took the photo from her wallet again, the one of the 4 of them by the van. And she noticed something for the first time. In the far corner of the image, almost out of frame. Standing near the road, not looking at Rachel stared at the photo for a long time. The figure in the corner of the frame, half shadowed, half turned, shouldn't have been there. Not if the motel clerk was telling the truth. According to the records, no other guests had checked in the night the Everly stayed. Room 6 had been the only one occupied. Wide-brimmed hat, a bulky jacket despite the heat, facing the street but unmistakably positioned toward the Everlys' van. She scanned the edges of the photo, her fingers trembling. In the reflection of the van's side mirror, a blur, like a second figure, low to the ground, too indistinct to tell, but it set her teeth on edge. Later that morning, Rachel brought the photo to Ruiz at the sheriff's office. The deputy squinted at the printout and tilted it under the light. "You sure this wasn't just a pedestrian?" "There are no sidewalks by that stretch," Rachel replied, "just a ditch and weeds." Ruiz sighed. "I can run it through enhancement software, but these photos weren't meant to catch detail like that. Cheap disposable cameras. It'll be blurry as hell." "Try anyway," Rachel said, "and check the original investigation file. Was there any mention of a man like this? Someone lingering by the van?" Ruiz hesitated, then said quietly, "You're not the first person to bring up a man in a hat." The original file was a disaster. Half of the evidence logs were handwritten, faded by sun exposure or coffee spills. Interview summaries were incomplete. Some were missing entirely, but one report stood out. It had been filed by Deputy Walter Hensley, the original officer assigned to the Everly case. In shaky cursive he wrote, "Unconfirmed sighting reported by gas station clerk, Caucasian male, late 40s, wearing wide-brimmed hat, seen near family's van at approximately 5:40 a.m. Claimed he was watching the sunrise. No further action taken." The report had been crossed out in red ink with the word irrelevant. No initials, no explanation. Rachel sat back in the chair, pulse racing. She looked at Ruiz. "Where is Deputy Hensley now?" "It took 3 hours to find him." He lived on the outskirts of town, in a single-story trailer with wind chimes that never stopped ringing, even when there was no wind. Ruiz agreed to stay in the car. Rachel approached the door slowly. It was dented, sun-bleached, and had a sticker that read, "Trespassers will be shot, survivors will be shot again." Anyway, nothing. She knocked again, louder. Finally, the door creaked open, just an inch. An eye appeared, suspicious. "You're not from the power company." "I'm Rachel Everly," she said. You worked my family's case." Silence. The door opened fully. Walter Hensley was older than she expected, well into his 70s, with deep lines in his face and a permanent squint, like someone who didn't trust sunlight. "I knew you'd come," he muttered. His living room smelled of dust and canned peaches. Stacks of old newspapers covered the carpet like insulation. A wall of VHS tapes lined a shelf labeled by year, 1995, 1996, 1997. He poured 2 cups of instant coffee, then sat in a worn recliner. "I told them," he said. "I told them about the man in the hat." "Who was he?" "I don't know. Never seen him before." The gas station girl said he paid in cash, bought a can of root beer, asked for change in quarters. "Did you follow up?" "I tried. But the sheriff back then, Hartman, told me to drop it, said we didn't need wild goose chases, that it was probably just a drifter." Rachel leaned forward. "Why would he suppress that?" Hensley's eyes narrowed. "You think this town wants to be the kind of place where whole families disappear?" He stood up slowly and walked to a shelf, pulled out a dusty tape labeled July 11th, Unconfirmed Sighting. He popped it into a portable VCR and adjusted the tracking. The screen flickered. It was grainy security footage, time-stamped 5:42 a.m., showing the parking lot of Cal's Gas and Stop, a half-mile from the motel. There was the Everly van. And just behind it, for 6 seconds, the man in the hat. Rachel held her breath. The man looked directly at the camera, then turned and vanished behind the pumps. It was too fast to identify his face, but there was something in the way he moved. Deliberate, confident, not like someone passing by, like someone waiting. That night, back at her motel, Rachel printed out stills from the footage. She pinned them to her wall, next to the seat photo, the necklace, her family picture. And now, a new photo, a yearbook clipping. It was Danny's kindergarten class, 1999. Her finger hovered over his smiling face, then over the girl standing next to him, Maggie Crane. Now the motel owner in Truth or Consequences. Rachel hadn't made the connection before, but Maggie would have seen Danny every day back then. Why hadn't she said anything? The next morning, Rachel drove to the Sierra Sands Motel, the last working motel in town. Maggie stood behind the reception desk, wearing a sun hat and humming to an old Conway Twitty song playing on the radio. Rachel placed the photo on the counter. "You knew him," Maggie blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Danny Everly. You were in his class? I checked the school archive." Maggie looked down at the photo. Her hand trembled slightly. "I was 6. That was a long time ago." But not long enough to forget someone who vanished without a trace. Maggie glanced over her shoulder, then lowered her voice. "I used to play with him at recess. He had nightmares. Said someone was watching their house at night. A man with a silver watch that made ticking noises." Rachel froze. "That detail. Did he ever say a name?" "No. But one day he came to school with a black eye. Told me he fell down the stairs." Rachel felt her stomach twist. Her parents would never have let that happen. Would they? She returned to her motel and began digging through her father's financial records again. One bank withdrawal stood out, $4,000 in cash, withdrawn 2 days before the trip. Rachel had always assumed it was for the vacation. But now, what if they weren't running to something, but from someone? She opened her notebook and scrawled a name in all caps. Who were they afraid of? That evening, Rachel visited the local. She combed through microfilms, news clippings, property records, and that's when she found it. A land parcel. Red Bluff Wells. An abandoned oil drilling site just outside of town, decommissioned in 1998. The land was listed under C. Hartman, the same last name as the sheriff who shut down the original investigation. Rachel's pen slipped from her fingers. When she got back to her car, there was an envelope on the windshield. No name, no return address. Inside, a single Polaroid, the Everly van, parked beside a rundown shack in the desert. The date on the bottom, July 12, 1999, a day after they disappeared. Rachel's breath caught. She turned the photo over. One line, handwritten in thick ink. "Some things are better left buried." Rachel stared at the Polaroid for hours. She memorized every detail: the faded green of the van, the warped wood panels of the shack, the slanted roofline, everything except for what she needed most. Where was this place? The background revealed no landmarks, no signs, just desert and sky and something jagged in the far distance. Maybe a rock formation, maybe a ridge. She scanned it into her laptop and ran it through every reverse image tool she knew. The timestamp, July 12, 1999, was the part that made her blood run cold. It meant her family was alive after the day they were declared missing. Someone had seen them, someone had photographed them, and then nothing. She returned to the sheriff's station and demanded to see Clay Dobbins. He emerged from his office slowly, coffee in hand, his eyes narrowed with exhaustion or avoidance. "Where did you get this?" he asked after looking at the photo. Rachel didn't answer. "Do you recognize that shack?" she countered. "No. Could be any number of hunting cabins or squatter huts out in the desert." Rachel watched his face carefully. "You know about Red Bluff Wells, don't you?" He didn't flinch, but he didn't deny it either. That land was private, off-limits since '98. Company pulled out after the EPA started sniffing around. Nothing left out there but rust and snakes. But the owner listed is Charles Hartman. He stiffened. "You're dredging up names that don't matter anymore." "They matter to me," she said, voice sharp. Later that day she received a voicemail. A male voice, distorted. "Stop digging, Rachel. Your family isn't where you think they are." Click. No number, no trace. Frustrated and rattled, Rachel drove out to the local hardware store and bought a detailed topographic map of Sierra County. Back in her motel room, she spread it across the bed and circled all known drilling sites shut down between 1995 and 8 sites. Only one near a distinctive ridge formation, the kind she saw in the Polaroid's horizon line. Site number 4, Ridgepoint Basin, Red Bluff Wells. She circled it in red. But before heading out, she made one more stop. She visited Maggie Crane again. This time, she brought the Polaroid. Maggie's hands shook as she looked. "I haven't seen this place in years," she said. "Now, you've been there?" "My uncle used to take me hunting out past Ridgepoint. We stayed in a shack just like that." Rachel leaned in. "Could you take me there?" Maggie. "Good," Rachel said. "That means no one else will be there." The next morning they set out at dawn. The drive was long, dry, and desolate. As the sun climbed, shadows shifted, and the desert began to shimmer like it was alive. By mid-morning, they reached a dirt road marked only by a rusted oil drum. No signs, no fencing, just a narrow trail through scorched earth. Maggie gripped the wheel tight. "Last time I was here, I was 10. What do you remember?" "Nothing good." An hour later, they found it, the shack from the photo, a rotted structure with a collapsed porch and shattered windows. The Everly van was long gone. But the earth was disturbed like something had been recently unburied and reburied again. Rachel stepped out slowly, sweat already soaking her back. The air was unnaturally still, no wind, no birds, just the sound of Maggie's breath quickening. They approached the shack. The door creaked. Inside, dust, rat droppings, rusted tools, and in the back corner, a trap door. Rachel knelt and lifted it. A staircase descended into darkness. She turned on her flashlight. The beam caught scratched wood, old shelving, and something shiny. The air was cold and smelled of mold and time. At the bottom, she found it, a small metal box. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, a toothbrush with a cartoon dinosaur handle, a child's sock, a photo booth strip of her parents smiling, taken days before the trip, and a note. "You were never supposed to find this." Rachel sat on the floor, tears blurring her vision. She felt Maggie's hand on her shoulder. "I think they stayed here," Rachel whispered. "Maybe they hid." But from who? That night, she sent the items for lab testing through a private contact at the university. Then she reviewed the tapes Hensley had given her. One stood out. Interview 17, A. Rivera. She played it. An old man's voice crackled through. I was out by the drilling sites, setting traps for jackrabbits, when I heard a car engine, saw a green van pull up to one of the shacks. A man got out, wide hat, real stiff, like military stiff. I thought he was just passing through, until I saw the kids. Click. The tape ended abruptly. Rachel checked the original file. There was no mention of any Rivera, another witness. Erased. She found a number scratched into the edge of the tape. Called it. No answer. Then, just before midnight, someone knocked on her motel door. She opened it carefully. An elderly man stood there, his hat in his hands. You asked about Rivera? He said. Rachel nodded slowly. He glanced over his shoulder, then entered. My name's Antonio Rivera. I gave a statement in '99. They told me I imagined it, threatened to take my license. What did you see? Not just the man. I saw the sheriff's car there, too. Sheriff Hartman. They were talking like they knew each other. The man in the hat handed him a folder. Thick, sealed. Hartman said, This never happened. Rachel's chest tightened. What happened to the family? Rivera looked down. I think they were taken, not killed. Rachel couldn't sleep that night. She sat at the window watching the parking lot. In her lap was the silver charm necklace. She ran her fingers along the edge, then paused. The leather was newer than it should have been. She checked the stitching. Inside, hidden in the fold, was a slip of paper, folded tight. She carefully opened it. One line, He never made it past the ridge. Rachel stared at it, frozen. He? Danny? Early the next morning, Rachel drove back to Ridgepoint Basin alone. She climbed the ridge above the shack, now illuminated by golden morning light, and there, behind a cluster of rocks, she found something, a shallow depression in the earth. She dug with her hands, faster and faster, until her fingers hit something. Fabric. She pulled back the dirt. It was a child's backpack. Inside, a melted box of crayons. A notebook labeled Danny's Explorer Log. She opened it. The last page read, If someone finds this, please help us. Mommy said not to go outside. But Daddy didn't come back. Rachel collapsed to her knees, clutching the book. He had written it. He had been alive, hiding, waiting. Rachel sat on the ridge, the sun rising behind her, clutching Danny's notebook to her chest like it was his heartbeat. The final entry echoed again in her mind. Mommy said not to go outside. But Daddy didn't come. The desert wind brushed over her shoulders. A hawk circled high above, cutting across the dawn sky. Rachel wiped her eyes. She wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. She was chasing proof. Danny had survived the initial disappearance, which meant at least one adult did too, and someone in this town had known that all along. Back in Truth or Consequences, Rachel walked into the sheriff's office with the pack, the notebook, and a voice that didn't tremble. You need to reopen the case officially, she said. Sheriff Dobbins raised his brow. Based on what? She laid the evidence on his desk. He leaned forward slowly, reading the final page in silence. Then, this could be a forgery. Rachel's voice was ice, or it could be a kid writing a goodbye letter before someone made him disappear forever. Ruiz entered the room behind her, holding a printed file. Sheriff, she said, barely hiding the urgency in her voice, you need to see this. It was a land deed transfer signed 3 weeks after the Everleys vanished. The property around Ridgepoint Basin had been sold for $1 to a shell corporation registered under the initials DE&C Logistics. Rachel felt the ground shift beneath her. DE, her brother's initials, but he would have been 6 years old. Ruiz looked stunned. Somebody used his name, hid it in plain sight, Rachel whispered. Why? The corporation had ties to a logistics firm based in El Paso, one that hadn't filed taxes in over a decade, but whose P.O. box was still active. Rachel and Ruiz made the trip the next day. The office building was abandoned, but the box still received mail. Rachel bribed the clerk with a $100 bill and a fake story about family inheritance. Inside the mailbox, a stack of generic spam mail, and one envelope, postmarked just 3 days ago. No return address. Inside, a photo of a teenage boy, brown eyes, messy hair, a crescent moon necklace barely visible. On the back, scribbled in pen, "He's alive." Rachel sat in the rental car, unable to breathe. She turned the photo toward Ruiz. "That's Danny. He looks 16, maybe 17. But he'd be 31 now." Rachel's eyes narrowed. What if he never knew his real name? Ruiz whispered, "Someone raised him." The pieces began to align. The shell company. The false death. The evidence erased. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a kidnapping. And not for ransom. For silence. They returned to town in silence. Rachel barely slept. The next morning she sat outside Maggie's motel again. This time she didn't knock. Maggie opened the door anyway. "I thought you'd come back," she said. Rachel handed her the photo of Danny. Older. Maggie stared at it for a long time, then sat down slowly. "I think I know who raised him," she whispered. Rachel froze. "Who?" Maggie's voice broke. "My uncle, Charles Hartman." Rachel's mind went blank. "The former sheriff?" Maggie nodded. "He used to bring a boy around, said he was the son of a cousin who died in a car wreck, but he never let the kid speak much. Kept him on a short leash, homeschooled him, never let him out in public." Rachel's voice dropped. "Did you ever hear what name he gave the boy?" Maggie nodded again. "Eli." Rachel blinked. Eli. Danny's middle name. They traced Hartman's last known residence, a cabin in Ruidoso, deep in the mountains. Records showed he died 4 years ago, alone. But if he had raised Danny, then where was the boy now? They combed through utility records, real estate logs, even hunting licenses. Finally, they found it. A trailer registered under Eli Hartman, now in Alamogordo, near a remote dirt road. No phone, no internet. Ruiz agreed to go with her. They arrived just before sunset. The trailer was modest, quiet, no signs of activity. Rachel's hands were trembling as she stepped out. She approached the door and knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. Then the door opened. A young man stood there, brown eyes, crescent moon necklace. Older now, maybe 30, but still unmistakable. Rachel whispered, "Danny?" He looked confused, then wary. "I think you have the wrong person." She stepped forward, voice cracking. "No, I don't. I'm Rachel. I'm your sister." His eyes widened, a flicker of something old and buried rising to the surface. "Rah, rah, rah." He collapsed. She caught him in her arms. He shook in her embrace, as memories crashed down on both of them like a sandstorm finally lifted. "I thought you were dead," he said. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. "I never stopped." Inside the trailer, the truth came pouring out. Hartman had taken him, after killing their father during an altercation near the shack. He told Danny that his mother had abandoned him, that Rachel had died, that no one was looking. Danny had been moved from place to place, taught to never speak of the past, conditioned to believe he was Eli Hartman, orphaned and rescued. But something never sat right. The dreams, the flashes. A girl's voice calling rah-rah. He thought he was broken, but he wasn't. He was stolen. That night, Rachel sat beside him as he held the crescent moon necklace in his hand. "Mom gave me this before we left. She said it would keep me safe." Rachel whispered, "It did." But Danny's eyes darkened. "There's something else." "What?" "I don't think Hartman was alone." Danny sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, the necklace clutched between his fingers like a lifeline. Rachel watched him, barely breathing. She had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, on the steps of a courthouse, across a police line, on a hospital bed. But never like this, never with so much still missing, even though the most important piece had been found. He was alive. But what had survived inside him? Danny's hands trembled as he spoke. I didn't remember at first. Hartman said I was dreaming. He said bad kids made up stories. He called you a fantasy. Rachel's throat tightened. You were a child. You did nothing wrong. He nodded slowly. But I always felt something was broken, like part of me had been amputated, but no one could see the scar. Do you remember Mom? His eyes searched the wall behind her, as if trying to summon a memory from a locked room. Her voice, soft. She used to hum when brushing my hair. There was a song like she sang it on the road. That was You Are My Sunshine. Danny's eyes filled. Yes. Over the next few hours, piece by piece, it came out. The night they disappeared, their father, Nathan, had found something. Papers, evidence, a ledger detailing illegal land deals and money funneling through the sheriff's office and Hartman's circle. Nathan had tried to confront him. They met at Ridgepoint. Rachel's mother had taken the kids and waited in the shack, but Nathan never came back. The last thing Danny remembered was waking to his mother screaming, then a shot, then silence. Rachel sat still, a storm of nausea building inside her. She asked softly, "Do you think he killed her too?" Danny didn't answer right away, but his jaw clenched. He dragged me out, said I was his now, that I was special, that my family abandoned me, that I was lucky. Rachel stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars blinked faintly. "I found your notebook," she said. "You wrote for help." He blinked. "You found it?" She turned. "I kept every piece, every clue. You kept me going." Later, Danny showed her a metal lockbox beneath the floorboards. Inside were items Hartman had kept, a pocket knife with the initials N.E., a woman's wedding ring, a VHS tape labeled "Do Not View." Rachel inserted the tape into the dusty player in the corner, static, then a flicker, then her mother, Susan Everly. Tied to a chair, dirty, bruised, eyes wide with terror, a single overhead bulb swung gently, casting shadows across the floor. Hartman's voice echoed from off-screen. "You say anything and the boy disappears. Forever." Rachel's heart shattered. Susan never spoke, just cried. Then the screen went black. Rachel fell to her knees. Danny dropped beside her. "I didn't know," he whispered. "He told me she left." Rachel clung to him. "He lied. He took everything, but we're here. We're still here." The next morning, they returned to Truth or Consequences together. Ruiz had already launched a quiet reinvestigation, bypassing Sheriff Dobbins. The evidence was enough to open a federal case. Hartman's estate was seized, his hidden accounts unearthed. In a storage unit registered under an alias, they found Rachel and Danny's original birth certificates, photo albums, and multiple forged documents under false family names. It became clear Hartman hadn't acted alone. Other officials had helped bury the case. One by one, their names surfaced. Rachel and Danny visited the site at Ridgepoint one last time. They buried a small box beneath the old shack. Inside, Susan's ring, the final page of Danny's notebook. A new note from Rachel. "You protected us. Now rest. We found each other. We're still writing this story." A memorial was held weeks later. Rachel spoke for the first time in public. She didn't talk about tragedy. She talked about memory, about holding on to it. "There is no closure," she said. "There's only the next step. And today, mine is with my brother beside me." Danny stood beside her, eyes wet, the crescent moon necklace around his neck again, restored but no longer burdened. The town watched in silence. For the first time, they truly saw her. That night, back in her apartment, Rachel finally opened the folder labeled Answers she placed inside. a photo of her and Danny reunited. A scan of the last entry from his book, a note she wrote for herself. The truth doesn't bring them back, but it brings us forward, and sometimes that's enough. Rachel sat alone on the front steps of her apartment, a soft summer wind brushing her. The city was quiet that night, unusually quiet, as if it, too, was waiting for something. In her hands she held the last photo they had ever taken as a family, the one in front of the motel. The one where Danny's laces were undone, her mom's hair was wind-tossed, and her father's smile looked both proud and distracted. 25 years. That's how long it took to turn a question into an answer. Inside, Danny was asleep. He'd been having more good nights than bad now. He still had dreams, fragments of the shack, the silence, the lies. But Rachel had started reading to him again, not bedtime stories, memories. She'd created a scrapbook filled with childhood photos, drawings he made, journal entries from her own notebooks, and transcripts of every article she ever wrote about disappearances. She titled it, What Was Never Lost. Rachel walked to the bookshelf and pulled out Danny's notebook, the one she had found in the desert. She opened to the final page again. If someone finds this, please help. Below it she had added her own words. I did. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel like she was chasing shadows anymore. She had walked into the dark, and someone had finally walked back out with her. Weeks later, a reporter called from a national news outlet. They wanted to feature Rachel and Danny in a special series on cold cases solved years later. Rachel declined, not because she wasn't proud, but because some stories didn't need to become spectacles. They were sacred. They were family. Instead, she returned to Truth or Consequences one last time, alone. She stopped by the remains of the El Rancho Motel, room 6. The door was gone now, just an open frame, warped by years of sun and silence. She stepped inside. The air was stale, but familiar. She sat where the bed used to be and closed her eyes. For a moment she imagined them all there, her father reading a map, her mother brushing Danny's hair, Danny laughing as he tied his laces in a knot. And she whispered. On her way out of town, she passed a new sign on the edge of the road. It hadn't been there before. A memorial marker. It read, In memory of those who were silenced and those who kept searching. Sierra County Board of Justice Rachel didn't stop the car, but she rolled down the window, let the wind move through her fingers, and smiled. The town hadn't forgotten, and neither had she. In her apartment that evening, Rachel sat by the window. The same window she'd stared through for years, waiting for a sign, a knock, a call, a clue. Now it framed something different. Danny was in the kitchen, humming to himself, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to her and sat across the table. I've been thinking, he said, we should visit the canyon, the one we never got to. She blinked, then smiled. Yeah, we should. And just like that, the road trip resumed, not from where it ended, but from where it was meant to begin. The wind outside rose gently, not howling, not whispering, but carrying, just like it always had in Truth or Consequences. Only this time, it wasn't carrying loss. It was carrying them forward, together.